Thank you very much, dear Harriet. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to be here and talk with you today about a project we had together with Martin, Culture in Crisis and the Human Dimension of Sustainable Preservation. Cultural heritage is the essential record of human existence and identity. It is actually the thread of continuity for which people search when the rhythm of their everyday life has been shattered. And that applies to the famous and iconic objects like the bust of Queen Nefertiti here in Berlin on Museum Island, as much as to the resistance art of Native American artist Charles Roncountre at the No Dakota Access Pipeline Camp in Standing Rock in North Dakota. The preservation of cultural heritage, I think, is arguably one of the grand challenges of our contemporary world, similar to other grand challenges such as world health, environmental sustainability, climate change, and others. And we know it's tangible, intangible, movable, immovable. It's in museums and collections and way beyond. It's in places of worships, monuments, archaeological, architectural sites, entire cities and landscapes, and our musical, food, and other traditions. And there is a strong allegiance to world heritage, actually, which is connecting people across all cultural and political boundaries, no matter where you come from, no matter what you studied, whether you are in the Bronx or in Berlin Mitte. People understand the significance of cultural and natural heritage. And just one example, if you actually, I forgot to push this button, sorry, because I have to push always buttons at the same time, so you see the same photo all the time, sorry. Because this is technology, sorry. This is the one you should see. If you go to the Canadian Rocky Mountains to Lake Louise and you arrive a little bit too late and all the tourist buses are already there, you have no chance to take a photo of the lake and the surrounding landscape. It's also bridging not only cultures, it's bridging generations. Here you see a small Jewish cemetery in the rural community of Unsleben in Bavaria, is my home region, and you see Holocaust survivor Lotti Hess, actually, who left Unsleben on a Kindertransport in the 1930s, teaching in my class at Yale. So, for how long can we still do that, right? Bridging those generations, having those 20-year-old kids talking to people in their 90s who went through all of that. Our cultural and natural heritage is increasingly threatened with destruction, not only by physical and chemical causes and decay, but also by changing social and economic conditions, most importantly by development, agriculture. Natural and man-made disasters are a very important factor, as recently illustrated in the horrifying way by all those cultural war crimes committed in the Middle East and Africa. But if you go to China, you're close to Berlin, and you want to see how the caves on the Silk Road look after the Germans took the mirror paintings to Berlin, that's actually how they look. So, destruction is actually everywhere. And the disappearance of a culture can be just as serious or even more serious than the disappearance of a species of a plant or an animal, writes Holy Father Francis in 2015 in his encyclical letter Laudato Si. So, any loss of cultural heritage is a loss of our common memory, impairing our ability to learn, to build experience, to apply the lessons of the past to the present and to the future. It is inseparable from the persecution of people, and therefore it is a humanitarian imperative. And that actually is why we have set up with Martin Culture in Crisis as a collaborative project a few years ago in 2015. We need to engage what an open society means, wrote Martin in his book Widerrede, and yes, we need to step up in defense, and we need to take risks, and we need to be ready to be, in Marx, lambasted if that's necessary, and I think we should do that. A good example to look at the contested character of memories and monuments, actually we can now see in the United States, has been mentioned already. A good example are the Confederate monuments. In some places they have disappeared, in others they are still there. Again, in others they are still there but disguised and hidden, like here in Birmingham, Alabama. So we are struggling with our heritage, and I think that is an obvious observation. We are also struggling because for too long we have clinged to just one side of the story. You can see here the Lewis and Clark Memorial in the north of Montana, actually on Blackfeet country, on Blackfeet land. The memorial to Camp Disappointment. I just want to give one example. Can I give one example? Yes. In Western conservation ethics, the reduction of use to avoid wear and tear is a basic principle of conservation. For the First Nations and Native American communities, however, the use actually means preserving culture, right? So sharing heritage. I mean, this whole week was about sharing heritage in Berlin. Sharing heritage is more than just scanning an object and putting the picture online. Newsflash to the museums, right? That is more. Sharing heritage actually means to bring this debate together, to deal with opposing, even with mutually excluding views, and seek compromise. And so you have said museums are institutions of high trust. I want to share a short story with a student of mine, a Native American student. I said this sentence, I grew up here. I didn't go to the Reichswacht, but I again went to the Glyptothek in Munich, right? I had my museum experience. And I'm an immigrant to the United States as well. So I said museums are institutions of high trust. And then a student said, Professor Simon, I'm sorry, where I come from, museums are no institution of high trust. Museums are exactly the opposite. We do not trust museums. And I said, that's interesting, right? I go for over 50 years through this life, and I'm so sure that museums are institutions of high trust, and there are people who do not share this opinion. So sharing heritage really needs to mean more. Another example, when we learn something about cultural heritage, we increase its value. Let's not forget that. Knowledge is a contribution to the value pie, is a contribution to the sum of values, whether, in the Three Magi Shrine in Cologne, in Naumburg Cathedral, at Uta von Ballenstedt, or at Queen Nefertiti on the Museum Island. Knowledge needs to be shared as well. And we must not to be afraid of actually sharing. One of Martin's ideas was to expand the scope from culture to nature conservation. And here with our partners at the National Museums Rwanda in September 2016 for the meeting, and also with Johannes Vogel from the Museum of Natural History here in Berlin. With the fourth industrial revolution, we experience increasing collaborative efforts in collecting data, setting standards, advancing digital technology for cultural preservation across humanities and sciences. And this will require new forms of technology, addressing issues of migration, of obsolescence of legacy techniques, and of course, new methods for both formal education and heritage and for public engagement. And it also requires, at some point, sorry, I forgot to press this button. It also requires at some point, to go and to be generous and creative in our support for the colleagues who defend cultural heritage on the first line against terrorism, against war. And if that means to go to Syria, I think that is what it implies. I still think, though, after all what happened. Let's not forget there is also the issue of the digital divide. Among the estimated 7.6 billion people on this planet, more than 50% have no access to the internet. This offline population is disproportionately illiterate, female, elderly, less educated, lower income, and more rural. And although the number of internet users has reached 3.6 billion people, those with access, almost 2.6 billion people live predominantly in the developed countries of the global north. Looting is not a new thing, right? The discussion we had in Culture and Crisis on illicit traffic and looting, the fate of the menorah used in the Second Temple, you can actually look up at the Arch of Titus in Rome, and you see that there's quite a few Roman soldiers which carry this heavy loot from the temple, because it's quite a lot, right? When I talk to my students, I encourage them always, when they go to a museum, ask yourself, where do all these objects come from? Or, like Benedict Savoy says, how much blood is on these objects, right? Ask yourself, when you see a sculpture in the museum, why does this sculpture have no feet? Can it be because of the way it was removed from its original location? Also, don't think that iconoclasm is a new thing. It goes back, this is a déjà vu effect, right? You know those pictures from Goya and from others. It is not new what happens in the Middle East. But museums, and I think this is my main message, have to change and transform in order to keep their significance. And I think we heard this more or less, I think, from all of us. They have to change from being a treasury to an agora of knowledge. And many of them, we still have a long way to go. But, when I look at these funerary busts, damaged by Daesh, rescued from the Palmyra Museum by colleagues of the DGM in Syria, all housed in these boxes. I think following also in the footsteps of Martin Roth, I think conservation in the 21st century can no longer be just about objects and sites. It has to be about the people. It has to be about the people who are connected with this heritage. It has to be close to those who hold some degree of ownership and wish to preserve and explore it. And this is how the roadmap for sustainable conservation in this century looks to me. And my last slide. By focusing on the human dimension of cultural heritage, its role as a powerful resource of inspiration, identity, and communication in the diversity of world perspectives, I do believe we can make a difference. That day in August 2002, with Martin Roth, a tired Director General in Dresden, sitting among all those paintings, which were rescued, by the way, by the normal people who carried them up, not the curators. I mean, they were also there, but they wouldn't have been able to move 5,000 objects, right, in that afternoon. Following Martin's footsteps, by focusing on the human dimension, we can make a difference. And I truly believe, this can be one of the many legacies of Martin. And thank you very much for your attention.